"We have to leave before our son finishes his toast," Margaret whispered, and the look in her eyes made the crowded room disappear around me. My wife had been smiling only minutes earlier, standing beneath a crystal chandelier in the living room of our son's new house in Cary, North Carolina. Nearly 50 guests filled the place, holding champagne glasses and admiring the tall windows, polished hardwood floors, and wide stone fireplace. Jason had called it the beginning of a new chapter. Margaret had spent the morning treating it like one. She wore the navy dress she saved for family occasions and the pearl earrings Jason had given her 12 Mother's Days ago. In her hands, she carried a pecan pie she had made from scratch because it had been his favorite since he was 8. Now her fingers were wrapped tightly around my wrist. "What happened?" I asked. She glanced toward the hallway leading to Jason's home office. Her face had lost all its color, but her voice stayed low and controlled. "Our son didn't buy this house, Robert. We did." I stared at her. 6 months earlier, Margaret and I had sold our small cabin near Lake Lure, the place where we had spent 30 summers together. We transferred $220,000 to Jason after he told us the money would cover the down payment and protect his family from rising interest rates. He promised the arrangement would remain private until he could repay us. We never asked for recognition. Margaret said helping your children should not come with applause. Across the room, Jason stood beside Lauren, his wife, accepting compliments from neighbors and business associates. Lauren wore a cream-colored dress and a smile that looked effortless from a distance. Jason raised his glass and tapped it with a spoon. The room began to quiet. "Before he speaks, tell me what you heard," I said. Margaret looked down at the pie she was still holding. Lauren had taken it from her when we arrived, then handed it to a server without even removing the foil. Somehow Margaret had retrieved it from the kitchen. The pie was still warm. "I went looking for the restroom," she said. The office door was open. Lauren was inside, with 2 women from Jason's company. Her thumb pressed into the edge of the pie plate. One of them asked how they managed such a large down payment. Lauren laughed. Behind us, someone called for everyone to gather closer. Jason smiled toward the crowd, but his eyes moved past us as though we were part of the furniture. "What did she say?" I asked. Margaret finally looked at me. There were no tears in her eyes. That frightened me more than tears would have. She told them Jason handled us because I barely remember what I signed anymore. My chest tightened. Margaret had managed our household finances for 41 years. She could recall every payment date, every account number, every promise our son had made. "And Jason?" I asked. He walked into the room while she was saying it. Margaret paused. The applause around us began as Jason lifted his glass. He didn't correct her. He only told her not to say it where too many people could hear. She placed the untouched pie on a narrow table beside the front door. Then she straightened her shoulders and smoothed the front of her dress. "They didn't invite us here as family, Robert. They invited us so everyone could see the grateful old parents who supposedly watched their successful son buy this place on his own." Jason began thanking his guests. Lauren noticed us near the door, and for the first time that evening, her perfect smile slipped. Margaret reached for her coat. "We have to go," she said again. This time, I understood that she was not running away. She was refusing to stand in a room where our generosity had been turned into proof of our weakness. 6 hours earlier, Margaret had stood in front of our bedroom mirror fastening the pearl earrings Jason had given her 12 years before. She tilted her head, checking them beneath her silver hair, then smiled at her reflection with the quiet excitement of a mother who believed she was about to be welcomed back into her son's life. "Do you think this dress is too formal?" she asked. The navy fabric reached below her knees, simple and elegant, the kind of dress she had worn to church dinners and anniversary celebrations. "You look beautiful," I told her. She touched one pearl lightly. Jason always liked these. On the kitchen counter, a pecan pie cooled beside a folded dish towel. Margaret had started it before breakfast, measuring the brown sugar and corn syrup without looking at a recipe. She had made the same pie for every one of Jason's birthdays from the time he was 8 until he left for college. Lauren had never shown much interest in family traditions, but Margaret kept trying. "A new house deserves something homemade," she said as she covered the pie with foil. Jason had called 3 weeks earlier to invite us. His voice had been cheerful but rushed. He said nearly 50 people would attend, including neighbors, co-workers, and several clients. He never mentioned the money we had given him. He did not say that the house would not have been possible without the sale of our cabin. Margaret noticed the omission, but she defended him before I could comment. He probably wants to thank us in person, she said. That was how she had always protected Jason, even from the truth of his own behavior. During the drive to Cary, she talked about the summers we had spent at Lake Lure. She remembered Jason jumping from the dock at 10 years old, shouting for her to watch every time his feet left the boards. She remembered rainy evenings playing cards beside the stone fireplace and the pencil marks on the kitchen doorway where we had measured his height. Selling the cabin had not been easy for her. She had packed 30 years of memories into cardboard boxes, then signed the closing documents without complaint because Jason said his children needed a safe neighborhood and better schools. We can still visit the lake, she told me as we drove. Memories do not belong to a building. When we arrived, Lauren opened the door before we reached the porch. She looked past the pie and gave Margaret a brief hug that barely touched her shoulders. You made something, she said, as though surprised. A young server took the pie and carried it toward the kitchen. Jason appeared from the living room, shook my hand, and kissed his mother on the cheek. Glad you made it, he said, already turning toward another guest. Margaret watched him walk away, then smoothed the front of her dress. He is busy, she whispered. The house was impressive, with nearly 4,000 square feet, tall windows, white oak floors, and furniture arranged as carefully as a showroom. Framed photographs covered the hallway walls. There were pictures of Lauren's parents, her sisters, and her childhood home. There were photographs of Jason and Lauren on vacations, at charity dinners, and beside their children on Christmas morning. Margaret walked slowly along the hallway, studying each frame. She stopped at the end, where an empty stretch of wall waited above a narrow table. There was not one photograph of us. She said nothing. She only adjusted the pearls at her ears and followed the sound of our son laughing in the next room. The laughter in the living room grew louder as Margaret and I moved among the guests, but the house felt colder with every step. Jason was near the fireplace, surrounded by men from his company, telling them how long he and Lauren had planned for this place. He spoke about discipline, patience, and the sacrifices required to build something from nothing. Margaret stood beside me with both hands folded over her purse. She did not interrupt. She did not look at me. She simply listened while our son described a version of his success that had no room for the people who had made it possible. A woman in a red dress approached and smiled at Margaret. You must be Lauren's mother, she said. Margaret answered gently. No, I am Jason's mother. The woman looked surprised. Oh, I am sorry. I saw so many photographs of Lauren's family that I assumed. Margaret gave her a small smile. That is understandable. Lauren appeared before the silence could deepen. She slipped one arm through the woman's and said, These are Jason's parents. They do not get out much anymore, so this is a big evening for them. Her tone was warm enough to sound caring, but the words landed with quiet precision. Margaret's fingers tightened around the clasp of her purse. We get out quite often, I said. Lauren laughed lightly. Of course you do, Robert. I only meant that crowds can be tiring at your age. Margaret touched my sleeve. Before I could answer, it was the same gesture she had used for 40 years whenever she wanted me to let something pass. Lauren guided the woman away, already speaking about the kitchen renovation. We continued toward the dining room, where trays of appetizers covered a long marble island. Margaret looked for her pecan pie. It was not there. A server finally told her it had been placed in the pantry because Lauren had ordered desserts from a bakery in Raleigh and wanted the display to match. I can bring it out later, the young man offered. Margaret shook her head. No, thank you. I would not want to disturb the display. Near the windows, Jason was showing another group the backyard. He pointed toward the new patio, the outdoor fireplace, and the half-acre of landscaped lawn. We stretched our budget, he said proudly, but we wanted a home our children could grow into. One of his co-workers asked whether buying such a place had been difficult. Jason glanced toward Lauren. She smiled and rested her hand on his arm. We saved for years, she said. Jason has always been careful with money. Margaret looked down at the floor. 6 months earlier, she had signed away the cabin where our children had grown up, then watched $220,000 leave our account because Jason said the bank needed the funds quickly. She had never asked for her name on a plaque. She had never wanted public gratitude. But hearing Lauren turn our sacrifice into their discipline changed something in her face. It was not anger. It was recognition. A few minutes later, Margaret excused herself to find the restroom. I watched her disappear down the hallway beneath a wall filled with other people's memories. Jason passed close enough for me to speak. "Your mother put a great deal into this house," I said quietly. He kept his eyes on the guests. "Not tonight, Dad." Then he straightened his jacket and walked away. I remained beside the dining room entrance, listening to him laugh again, while somewhere beyond the hallway, Margaret was about to learn that being erased from the walls was only the beginning. Jason stepped onto the raised hearth and tapped a spoon against his glass until the conversations faded. I remained near the dining room entrance, watching the hallway where Margaret had disappeared. "Lauren and I want to thank everyone for celebrating this milestone with us," Jason began. His voice carried easily through the room. "This house represents years of planning, discipline, and believing that hard work eventually pays off." Several guests nodded. Lauren stood beside him beneath the chandelier, smiling as though each word had been polished in advance. Jason spoke about working late, delaying vacations, and making careful investments. He thanked his business partners, his real estate agent, and Lauren's parents for encouraging them through the process. He did not mention us. I remembered the afternoon he came to our kitchen with a folder of mortgage estimates. Margaret had poured him coffee and listened while he explained that a larger down payment would secure the house before another buyer made an offer. He said the neighborhood had excellent schools and safe sidewalks for the children. He said he hated asking. Margaret looked through the numbers, then turned toward the window above our sink. "We could sell the cabin," she said. Jason lowered his eyes, but he did not refuse. That cabin had been the one place Margaret never wanted to lose. We bought it when Jason was 7, after saving for nearly a decade. It was modest, with 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, and a dock that leaned slightly toward the water. Margaret painted the kitchen cabinets herself. She planted hydrangeas along the front steps. Every summer, she measured Jason and his sister against the pantry doorway and marked their heights in pencil. When the sale was completed, Margaret returned one final time with a cardboard box. She removed the family photographs, folded the old quilts, and stood for several minutes beside those pencil marks. She did not complain. She only ran her fingers over Jason's name and whispered, "At least this will help his children build memories of their own." Now he stood in a house purchased with those memories and told a room full of people that sacrifice had been his. Applause rose when he finished the first part of his speech. Lauren leaned toward him and kissed his cheek. I saw her father raise his glass from the front row. My chair was near the back, beside a folding table where the catering staff stored extra napkins. Jason continued, "We wanted this home to reflect who we are and where we are going." I looked again toward the hallway. Margaret had been gone longer than necessary. I started toward her, but Jason called my name. For one hopeful second, I thought he was finally going to acknowledge what she had done. "Dad," he said with a broad public smile, "make sure Mom is here for the family photograph after the toast." A few people turned toward me. "She went to find the restroom," I answered. His smile tightened. "Please bring her back." Lauren arranged the photograph carefully. Carefully. That word stayed with me as I entered the hallway. I passed framed pictures of Lauren's parents holding our grandchildren, Lauren's sisters at holiday dinners, and Jason standing beside people I barely knew. The office door near the end of the hall was partly open. Margaret stood a few feet away, motionless, her hand resting against the wall. A woman inside the office laughed softly. Then I heard Lauren's voice. "The money was easy," she said. The difficult part was making his mother believe it was still her decision. Margaret turned toward me. Her expression was calm, but the woman who had entered that hallway hoping to find a restroom was no longer the woman looking back at me. Margaret lifted one finger to her lips, and we remained outside the office while Lauren continued speaking. "Jason handled the transfer," she said. "His mother signed everything without asking enough questions. She likes to believe she is still protecting him." One of the women asked whether Margaret expected the money to be repaid. Lauren laughed again. "She calls it a family loan, but there is nothing serious in writing. Besides, she is almost 70. By the time she decides to make an issue of it, Jason will convince her that she misunderstood." The second woman lowered her voice, but the hallway was quiet enough for us to hear. "Does she know you tell people the money came from your savings?" Of course not," Lauren replied. "She barely understands how we manage things now." Margaret closed her eyes for one brief second. She did not lean against me. She did not make a sound. Then Jason entered the office from another doorway. "Lauren," People are waiting for the photograph, he said. You should not discuss this here. I was only explaining how we made the purchase work, Lauren answered. You were telling them my mother cannot remember what she signs. There was a pause. I waited for our son to defend Margaret. Instead, he sighed. Just keep your voice down. Dad is somewhere nearby. Lauren sounded amused. Your father will follow whatever your mother decides, and your mother will eventually follow whatever you tell her. Jason did not challenge that either. He only reminded them that his toast was not finished. Their footsteps moved toward the other side of the office. Margaret opened her eyes. Something in them had settled. For months, I had watched her excuse Jason's unanswered calls, shortened visits, and requests that always arrived with urgent deadlines. She had called him busy. She had called Lauren overwhelmed. She had called every slight a misunderstanding because the alternative was admitting that our son had learned to measure his parents by what they could provide. Margaret, I whispered, we should walk in there and tell them we heard everything. She shook her head. Not yet. She stepped closer to the open door and looked inside. The office was arranged with dark shelves, a leather chair, and a wide desk facing the backyard. On the desk sat a folder marked family planning. Margaret noticed it at the same moment I did. She glanced down the hallway, then entered the empty room. We should not be in here, I said, although I followed her. Neither should my future be, she answered. The folder contained brochures for senior living communities outside Raleigh, notes about monthly fees, and a typed page listing our current home as a future family asset. Beside it was a draft email from Jason to an estate planning attorney asking how an adult child could become involved if aging parents began making questionable financial decisions. Margaret, read every line. Her hands remained steady. She removed nothing. Instead, she took out her phone and photographed each page in order. Then she returned the folder to the exact place where she had found it. From the living room, Jason called for us to join the family photograph. Margaret looked toward the sound of his voice. He did not just let Lauren erase what we gave them, she said. He has already started planning what they will take next. She slipped her phone back into her purse, adjusted her pearl earrings, and walked out of the office without touching a single thing. Margaret walked beside me toward the living room with the same measured steps she had used when we arrived, but I could feel the change in her. She was no longer trying to explain away what she had heard. She was no longer protecting Jason from the meaning of his choices. Near the dining room entrance, she stopped and looked toward the front door. We have to go, she said quietly. I asked whether she wanted her coat. Yes, and my pie. Across the room, Jason was arranging relatives beneath the chandelier for the photograph Lauren had planned. Lauren's parents stood in the center with our grandchildren. A space had been left near the edge for Margaret and me. Jason spotted us and lifted one hand. There you are. Come stand over here before everyone starts moving. Margaret did not answer. She crossed to the pantry and asked the young server for the pecan pie. He handed it back with an embarrassed expression. The foil had never been removed. Not one slice had been served. Margaret thanked him as though he had returned something valuable. Then she carried the pie toward the entry table and set it beside her purse. Lauren hurried over, still smiling for the guests. Margaret, we need you in the picture. No, you do not, Margaret replied. Lauren blinked. Of course we do. You are family. Margaret looked at the photographs lining the hallway, then at the untouched pie. That has not been clear tonight. Lauren lowered her voice. Please do not make this uncomfortable. Margaret slipped on her coat. I am not the one who made it uncomfortable. Jason joined us, his public smile still fixed. In place. Mom, what is going on? Your guests are waiting, she said. Go finish your celebration. We planned a family toast, he replied. You cannot simply leave in the middle of it. I expected Margaret to mention the office, the folder, or the $220,000. She mentioned none of them. Tonight is your story, Jason, she said. You have already decided which parts of the truth belong in it. His expression changed. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. Lauren glanced toward the room, where several guests had begun watching us. She is tired, Lauren said quickly. Crowds can be confusing for her. Margaret turned to face her. She did not raise her voice. I heard what you said in the office. The color left Lauren's cheeks. Jason looked toward the hallway, then back at his mother. Mom, whatever you think you heard, this is not the time. You are right, Margaret said. This is not the time. She picked up the pie and opened the front door. Jason followed us onto the porch. The evening air was cool, and the lights along the driveway cast pale circles across the stone. "Are you really leaving because of one conversation?" he asked. Margaret paused at the top step. "No, Jason. I am leaving because of every conversation you believed I would never hear." She continued toward our car without looking back. I followed her, carrying our coats and wondering how many years she had spent making herself smaller so our son could feel larger. Behind us, the front door remained open. Music drifted from the house. Guests waited for the family photograph. Margaret placed the pie carefully on the back seat, fastened her seat belt, and looked straight ahead. "Do not call him tonight," she said. "I need to remember everything before they begin telling me I remember nothing." We drove home in silence while Margaret watched the lights of Carrie disappear behind us. The pecan pie rested on the back seat, still covered, still untouched. I wanted to say something that would soften what had happened, but every comforting sentence sounded dishonest before I spoke it. When we reached our house, Margaret carried the pie into the kitchen and placed it on the same counter where she had wrapped it that morning. She removed her pearl earrings, set them beside the plate, and stood there looking at both for a long time. "I wore those because I thought he remembered me," she said. Her voice did not break. That made the room feel even quieter. At 9:17, Jason called. Margaret watched his name appear on her phone until the screen went dark. At 9:23, Lauren called. At 9:31, Jason sent a message saying we had embarrassed him in front of his coworkers and needed to explain ourselves before rumors spread. Margaret read it once, then placed the phone face down. "He is worried about rumors," she said, "not about what his mother heard." The next morning, she was already awake when I entered the kitchen. The pie had been cut into 2 neat slices. She poured coffee and pushed one plate toward me. "It is still good," she said. We ate without speaking. Afterward, she opened the small desk near the breakfast nook and began arranging documents across the table. There was the cabin sale agreement, the bank confirmation for $220,000, and the email in which Jason promised to treat the money as a family loan. Margaret printed the photographs from his office and placed them in chronological order. Senior living brochures, notes about our monthly expenses, a page describing our home as a future family asset. The final photograph showed the draft email asking how Jason could become involved in our finances if we started making questionable decisions. Margaret studied that sentence longer than the others. "They need me to look confused," she said. "Otherwise, none of this works." She called our attorney, Helen Crawford, a woman who had handled our estate documents for nearly 15 years. Margaret told her only that we needed an urgent review and that Jason should no longer hold any financial authority if something happened to us. Helen scheduled us for that afternoon. Margaret also called her physician and requested copies of her most recent wellness examination. She did not ask anyone to prove she was intelligent. She simply began collecting the facts that Lauren and Jason believed they could replace with a story. By noon, there were 7 missed calls on her phone. Jason's final message sounded softer. He said emotions had been high, Lauren had chosen her words poorly, and family should not let one misunderstanding ruin an important night. Margaret listened to the message twice. "He keeps calling it one conversation," she said, as though the folder prepared itself. At Helen's office, Margaret removed Jason as alternate financial agent and replaced him with our daughter, Emily. She updated the instructions concerning our home, medical decisions, and access to our accounts. Nothing was left open to interpretation. When Helen asked whether she wanted to demand repayment of the house money, Margaret shook her head. "Not today. I need to know whether my son is sorry for what he did or only afraid of what I know." That evening, Jason sent another message asking to visit in 2 days. Margaret agreed. Then she gathered every document into a blue folder and placed it in the center of our dining room table. "When they come," she said, "I will not argue about my memory. I will show them theirs." Jason and Lauren arrived at 3 in the afternoon, exactly on time and carrying nothing. Margaret had set 4 cups on the dining room table, but she had not prepared food. The blue folder rested in front of her. Jason noticed it before he sat down. Lauren noticed it too, though she pretended to study the flowers near the window. "Mom," Jason began, "we came because we want to clear up what happened." Margaret poured coffee for everyone. Her movements were calm and precise. "Then begin with the truth," she said. Lauren folded her hands in her lap. "What you heard was taken out of context." Margaret opened the folder and placed the photograph of the senior living brochures on the table. Which context makes this appropriate? Lauren glanced at Jason. He leaned forward. We were only exploring options. You and Dad are getting older. Planning ahead is responsible. Margaret placed the next photograph beside the first. It showed the page describing our home as a future family asset. Planning for whom? She asked. Jason looked at the paper, then at me. That was not final. It was not yours, I said. He exhaled and looked away. Lauren recovered first. No one was trying to take anything. We were concerned that Margaret might make financial decisions without understanding the consequences. Margaret slid the bank record across the table. The transfer amount was printed clearly. $220,000. I understood this decision, she said. I sold a place I loved so your family could buy a home. I also understood your promise to repay us. She added Jason's email to the line of documents. His face tightened. I never said I would not repay you. You told a room full of people that the money came from years of your own saving, Margaret replied. Then you allowed your wife to describe me as confused because that version protected your pride. Lauren shook her head. This is becoming dramatic. Margaret looked at her for several seconds. No. Drama is what happens when people need noise to hide facts. I brought facts. She placed a letter from her physician on the table, followed by the updated estate documents from Helen Crawford. Jason picked up the first page and read silently. You removed me as financial agent, he said. Yes. You replaced me with Emily. Yes. His voice rose slightly. You made all of these changes without speaking to me. Margaret rested both hands beside her coffee cup. You planned where I would live, how my home would be treated, and when my judgment should be questioned without speaking to me. The room became still. Lauren reached for Jason's sleeve. We should go. Margaret closed the folder. Before you do, there is one more thing. Robert and I will not fund the backyard project, guarantee another business loan, or provide regular childcare according to your schedule. Any future help will be offered by us, not expected by you. Jason stared at her. You are punishing the children. No, Margaret said. I am ending an arrangement in which my love was treated as an account you could withdraw from. He looked toward me as though I might soften her decision. I did not. After a long silence, he asked, Are you demanding the house money back? Margaret answered carefully. Not today. I want to see whether you can apologize without calculating the cost. Lauren stood first. Her chair moved softly against the floor. Jason remained seated for another moment, looking at the documents that recorded every choice he had hoped we would forget. When he finally stood, Margaret did not reach for him. She only gathered the papers into the blue folder and aligned its edges with the table. At the front door, Jason turned back. Mom, I never wanted you to feel erased. Margaret met his eyes. Then you should have noticed how much effort it took to remove me. Jason and Lauren arrived at 3 in the afternoon, exactly on time and carrying nothing. Margaret had set 4 cups on the dining room table, but she had not prepared food. The blue folder rested in front of her. Jason noticed it before he sat down. Lauren noticed it too, though she pretended to study the flowers near the window. Mom, Jason began. We came because we want to clear up what happened. Margaret poured coffee for everyone. Her movements were calm and precise. Then begin with the truth, she said. Lauren folded her hands in her lap. What you heard was taken out of context. Margaret opened the folder and placed the photograph of the senior living brochures on the table. Which context makes this appropriate? Lauren glanced at Jason. He leaned forward. We were only exploring options. You and Dad are getting older. Planning ahead is responsible. Margaret placed the next photograph beside the first. It showed the page describing our home as a future family asset. Planning for whom? She asked. Jason looked at the paper, then at me. That was not final. It was not yours, I said. He exhaled and looked away. Lauren recovered first. No one was trying to take anything. We were concerned that Margaret might make financial decisions without understanding the consequences. Margaret slid the bank record across the table. The transfer amount was printed clearly. $220,000. I understood this decision, she said. I sold a place I loved so your family could buy a home. I also understood your promise to repay us. She added Jason's email to the line of documents. His face tightened. I never said I would not repay you. You told a room full of people that the money came from years of your own saving, Margaret replied. Then you allowed your wife to describe me as confused because that version protected your pride. Lauren shook her head. This is becoming dramatic. Margaret looked at her for several seconds. No. Drama is what happens when people need noise to hide facts. I brought facts. She placed a letter from her physician on the table, followed by the updated estate documents from Helen Crawford. Jason picked up the first page and read silently. You removed me as financial agent, he said. Yes. You replaced me with Emily. Yes. His voice rose slightly. You made all of these changes without speaking to me. Margaret rested both hands beside her coffee cup. You planned where I would live, how my home would be treated, and when my judgment should be questioned without speaking to me. The room became still. Lauren reached for Jason's sleeve. We should go. Margaret closed the folder. Before you do, there is one more thing. Robert and I will not fund the backyard project, guarantee another business loan, or provide regular childcare according to your schedule. Any future help will be offered by us, not expected by you. Jason stared at her. You are punishing the children. No, Margaret said. I am ending an arrangement in which my love was treated as an account you could withdraw from. He looked toward me as though I might soften her decision. I did not. After a long silence, he asked, Are you demanding the house money back? Margaret answered carefully. Not today. I want to see whether you can apologize without calculating the cost. Lauren stood first. Her chair moved softly against the floor. Jason remained seated for another moment, looking at the documents that recorded every choice he had hoped we would forget. When he finally stood, Margaret did not reach for him. She only gathered the papers into the blue folder and aligned its edges with the table. At the front door, Jason turned back. Mom, I never wanted you to feel erased. Margaret met his eyes. Then you should have noticed how much effort it took to remove me.